Assalamu alaikum. This is the Advanced Macroeconomic Theory course directed to fourth year economics section. Let's now take how can we derive IS curve and equilibrium in goods market and money market. We call it internal equilibrium in a whole economy. In deriving IS curve, we start by the equilibrium condition in goods market. We considered a closed economy with government, and the type of taxes is lump sum tax. Here, the national income equals aggregate expenditure. Aggregate expenditure consists of consumption, investment, government expenditure. Here the consumption, A plus BY minus T, and investment equations consist of two parts. I note, which is autonomous investment. This is the part of investment that does not relate to the interest rate. It relates to the profitability of investment projects. We call it autonomous investments. While there is another part of investment, which is induced investment, which is related negatively with interest rate. H in this investment function, we call it investment sensitivity to interest rate, plus G, which is constant government expenditure. عشان احنا بنجيب ال IS curve هي relationship between interest rate and the national income. فبجيب ال interest rate on the left hand side, فهنطلع ال HR الناحية التانية. طبعا بتاخد ال opposite sign. Okay, here is the IS equation. Remember that you may be asked in the exam, how can we derive mathematically the IS equation? We know that the IS curve is a combination of values of national income and interest rate at which goods market is at equilibrium. In other words, it is a combination of national income and interest rates at which aggregate demand equals aggregate supply. In order to get the slope of IS equation, which is the change in interest rates over the change in national income, in this case, the slope, we differentiate this the IS equation with respect to national income, and we get the slope, which is 1 minus B over H. It has a negative value because we have a negative relationship between interest rate and the national income. طب ازاي افهم ال inverse relation ديت؟ هنقول when interest rate increases, induced investment would decrease. When investment decreases through the multiplier, national income would decrease. Thereby, we have an inverse or negative relationship between interest rate and national income. Now, how can we derive IS curve graphically? The starting point is the interest rate. When interest rates decreases, investment would increase. When investment increase, aggregate expenditure would shift upward, and aggregate demand would shift rightward from AD0 to AD1, and successive reduction in interest rate would lead to a successive rightward shift in aggregate demand curve. The horizontal distance between new and old aggregate demand measure the change in national income. تمام؟ يعني لما ال interest rate بتقل, ال investment would increase. The investment would affect aggregate expenditure positively. The aggregate expenditure would shift upward, and aggregate demand curve would shift rightward. Through the multiplier, equilibrium national income would increase. By how much? المفروض بالfull multiplier effect. اللي change in investment times the value of simple multiplier اللي أنا بقيسها بالhorizontal distance between new and old aggregate demand curve. تمام. فاحنا كنا عند point A وبعدين when investment increases aggregate demand shift rightward اتحركنا لpoint B. فالpoint A ديت يعني يقابلها في الجراف اللي تحت a certain interest rate R1 when interest rate decreased from R1 to R2 we find aggregate demand curve shift rightward from AD0 to AD1 and the new equilibrium point B at which national income would be Y2 connecting the equilibrium points in aggregate supply aggregate demand diagram we get IS curve. So IS curve is a combination of interest rate and equilibrium national income at which the goods market is at equilibrium. Goods market is at equilibrium means that aggregate demand would equal aggregate supply. Why IS curve is negatively sloped or downward sloping? Because we have a negative relationship between equilibrium national income and equilibrium interest rate. لازم برضو نكون فاهمين إن ال slope of the curve measure the sensitivity of interest rate with respect to any change in national income by 1 unit. Any point on IS curve is an equilibrium point where aggregate demand equals aggregate supply. It is a point on IS curve. Any points of IS curve, it is not a point of equilibrium in goods market. Let's take an example. Any point to the right of IS curve, like point B, at this point, we have excess supply in goods market where equilibrium national income is greater than desired aggregate expenditure, and in order to restore equilibrium in goods market we have to reduce output and reduce sales by increasing or accumulating inventory. On the other side, at any point on the left of IS curve like point C, it is this equilibrium point in goods market, or at point C the goods market is not in equilibrium because we have excess demand where desired aggregate expenditure is greater than aggregate supply. Thereby, in order to restore equilibrium, we have to increase the output, sales, and thereby national income by reducing inventory. Now let's move to shifts in IS curve. Remember that IS curve is a combination of interest rates and equilibrium national income at which goods market is at equilibrium. Any point on IS curve is an equilibrium point in goods market. Any point to the right or to the left of IS curve represents a disequilibrium in goods market. Now, what are main causes of shifts in IS curve? For example, what cause a rightward shift in IS curve? هي كده rule. Factors that cause shifts in IS curve are the autonomous expenditures components of aggregate expenditures. تمام. زي مثلا increase in autonomous consumption, increase in autonomous investment, if government apply an expansionary fiscal policy by increasing government expenditure or reducing taxes, or if the government adopts a balanced budget policy, which is increasing government expenditures and increasing taxes by the same amount. We talked before that when the governments adopt a balanced budget policy, the national income would increase by the initial increase in government expenditure or the initial increase in taxes. if, for example, the government adopts an expansionary fiscal policy, so the government expenditure would increase. Graphically, IS curve would shift rightward. At the same interest rate, national income would increase from Y1 to Y2. This horizontal distance between new and old IS curve represent full multiplier effects of the expansionary fiscal policy. يعني المفروض لما ال government adopt expansionary fiscal policy, the final change in equilibrium national income طبعا considering عندي interest rates زي ما هي عند R، المفروض Y بتزيد بإيه؟ change in government expenditures time the value of multiplier، يعني 1 over 1 minus B times the change in G. We call it full multiplier effect. Okay? If the government adopt an expansionary fiscal policy by reducing taxes، هنلاقي إن the final change in equilibrium national income would be lower than if it increases government expenditure. Why? Because we know that the government multiplier is higher than tax multiplier. Now let's turn to the slope of IS curve. We know that the slope of IS curve is negative because it reflects a negative relationship between interest rate and equilibrium national income. It equals 1 minus B over H. So the factors that affect the slope of IS curve would be the sensitivity of investment to any change in interest rates and the margin propensity to consume and the margin propensity to save. When investment is more sensitive to any change in interest rates and the margin propensity to consume is high, IS curve would be relatively flatter than before. And on the other side, when investment is less sensitive to any change in interest rates, it means H is less than 1 and the value of marginal propensity to consume is low. We got a steeper IS curve. طبعا ده هيفيدني في ايه؟ هيفيدني بعد كده لما بتكلم على effectiveness of fiscal policy on economic activity according to the Keynesian theory. دي أول حاجة لما أبقى عايزة أعرف مثلا إمتى في أنه حالة لما يكون ال IS curve steeper than before أو flatter than before، أنه واحد فيهم يعني is more effective على ال economic activity. المقصود بيها طبعا ال level of output and employment. وبعد كده next step لما باجي أعمل مقارنة ما بين ال classical model وال Keynesian model. Move now to the overall equilibrium in the whole economy, or we call it internal equilibrium in the economy. إمتى بيحصل equilibrium, simultaneous equilibrium in goods market and the money market? Graphically, when LM and IS curve intersects at point A. يعني at point A دي نقطة عندها الماني ماركت والجودز ماركت is at equilibrium. Point مثلا زي point B. At this point هي correspond to interest rate lower than the equilibrium interest rate. يعني R star the level of interest rate at which money market and goods market is at equilibrium. طبعا لازم نبقوا فاكرين إن إحنا في ال Keynesian theory, according to the Keynesian theory, what would happen in money market would affect goods market. لكن في ال classical thought there is a separation between money market and goods market. طبعا ايه اللي بيعمل البالانس ده او ايه اللي اللينك هنا ما بين الماني ماركت والجودز ماركت هو الانترست ريت. تمام؟ فالار ستار هي interest rate at which money market and goods market is at equilibrium. At point B ديت corresponds to a level of interest rate below the equilibrium. At point B there is an equilibrium in goods market. عرفت ازاي؟ عشان هي point على ال IS curve. but it does not represent an equilibrium in money market. عرفت ازاي؟ عشان هي point على يمين ال LM curve. تمام. Okay, so at point B, it is a point to the right of LM represent an excess demand for money because it is located on the right of LM curve. And in order to restore equilibrium, interest rate should increase. Okay, يعني point B أنا عندي equilibrium في ال goods market بس عندي excess demand for money. فيبقى كده عندي excess supply for bonds. In order to restore equilibrium in money market, we have to increase interest rate in order for price of bond to be decreased. بالتالي demand for money would decrease وفي الحالة ديت هعمل restoring equilibrium وارجع تاني لpoint A. On the other side, at any point مثلا نقول مثلا point C. C corresponds to an interest rate above the equilibrium interest rate. It represents an equilibrium point in money market عشان point C, it is a point on LM curve. But there is an excess supply in goods market عشان هي to the right of IS curve. So in order to restore equilibrium, we have to reduce national income by increasing inventory, and interest rate would decrease in this case in order to restore equilibrium. Now we move to the policy effects in Islm model. The starting point is a point of equilibrium between IS note and LM note. Point E note, we have equilibrium in goods market and the money market. We have internal equilibrium in the whole economy. Both markets are simultaneously in equilibrium. Government ممكن تؤثر على economic activity through two policies, either fiscal policy or monetary policy. Fiscal policy ممكن تكون expansionary fiscal policy or contractionary fiscal policy. التولز بتاعتي هي government expenditure and taxes. لو أنا كgovernment بطبق expansionary fiscal policy دي could be through increasing government expenditures or reducing taxes or increasing both government expenditure and taxes by the same value, and we call it balanced budget policy. طبعا امتى الجوفرمنت بتطبق expansionary fiscal policy؟ لو أنا عندي idle resources، عندي unemployment، عندي recession. تمام. هي قاعدة كده ال fiscal policy affects only IS curve. ليه؟ عشان التولز بتاعت ال fiscal policy بتؤثر على ال components ال aggregate demand components، فبتأثر بس على ال IS curve. طيب consider now the government adopts an expansionary fiscal policy through increasing government expenditure. في البداية خالص أنا ما جبت سيرة ال interest rate، فأنا كنت عند R note وكنت عندي E note. ال G increases by a certain value, IS curve would shift rightward. The initial impact of this expansionary fiscal policy that we move from Y naught to Y1. The horizontal distance between IS1 and IS naught measure the full multiplier effect of expansionary fiscal policy. يعني الواي المفروض هتزيد في الأول خالص بالمسافة ديت من y نوت ل y1. دي بتقيس ايه؟ ل change in y اللي هو بيساوي ل change in g times ال government multiplier. تمام؟ لو ال government طبقت expansionary fiscal policy من خلال إن هي قللت التاكسز، فأنا كده يبقى المسافة دي هتمثل ال change في التاكس times التاكس multiplier لو ال minus b over 1 minus b. لو ال government عملت اللي هي البالانس بادجت بوليسي، ففي الحالة ديت المسافة ديت من y نوت ل y1 اللي هو ال change in y هيساوي ال change in g times change in t times ال 1 minus b over 1 minus b. تمام؟ times ال value يعني بتاع المالتبلاير. اوكي؟ طيب احنا كده اتحركت من e نوت ل e1. But at e1 we have equilibrium in goods market عشان دي point على IS curve, but this equilibrium in money market. In money market we have excess demand for money because E1 is a point to the right of LM. We have excess demand for money. In order to restore equilibrium, we have to increase interest rate. لما الانترست ريت هتزيد ده هيعمل ايه؟ هيقلل الانفستمنت، هيقلل البرايفت انفستمنت. في الحالة ديت الناشونال انكم هيقل والفاينل change in equilibrium national income would be from Y0 to Y2. طبعا نتيجة ان الانترست ريت زادت البرايفت انفستمنت هو اللي هيقل. تمام. So we call it crowding out effect أو أثر مزاحمة الاستثمارات الحكومية للاستثمار الخاص نتيجة إن ال government adopts expansionary fiscal policy. يعني نقطة البداية عندي إن ال government adopts expansionary fiscal policy زودت ال government investment or public investments. في الحالة ديت اتحركت من E0 ل E1. عند ال E1 بقى عندي disequilibrium in money market. In order to restore equilibrium الانترست ريت هتزيد. لما الانترست ريت هتزيد معناها ان في private investment هيطلعوا خالص، ده معناها ان استثمارات حكومية حلت محل استثمار خاص، عشان كده بنسميه crowding out effect. يبقى كده عشان كده الفاينل impact of expansionary fiscal policy بدل ما أزيد من Y0 ل Y1 لا بقيت أزيد من Y0 ل Y2. يبقى كده لازم نبص تاني على المالتبلاير ولازم أزود ترم في المالتبلاير بيعبر عن crowding out effect. يبقى هناخد هنا fiscal policy multiplier in Islm model. This multiplier takes into account the crowding out effect. كل ما crowding out effect يكون قليل ده معناه إن fiscal policy بتكون more effective على national income. كل ما crowding out impact يكون قليل ده معناها إن كل ما بزود government expenditure أو بقلل التاكسز الواي equilibrium national income هيزيد معايا قوي. لكن كل ما crowding out عندي يكون عالي ده معناها إن fiscal policy would not be effective. Here fiscal policy multiplier ده في حالة government multiplier government expenditure multiplier 1 over 1 minus b plus term of crowding out effect اللي هو HK over M. لو fiscal policy لو أنا كنت بطبق fiscal policy من خلال التاكسز فأنا هقول إن اللي هو التاكس multiplier هيبقى minus b over 1 minus b plus HK over M. لو كانت balance budget multiplier هيبقى 1 minus b over 1 minus b plus HK over M. يبقى الترم اللي أنا بالنسبة لي أنا بركز عليه هو الترم الخاص بالcrowding out impact HK over M. كل ما الترم ده يكون قليل ده معناها إن fiscal policy would be more effective على إيه؟ على economic activity على الواي اللي هي output or the national income. طيب إيه بقى اللي بيأثر على crowding out effect؟ H اللي هي investment sensitivity to interest rate، K اللي هي money sensitivity to national income، and M اللي هي money sensitivity to interest rate. تمام. كل ما M تكون كبيرة والH والK تكون قليلة ده معناها إن crowding out impact would be low and the fiscal policy would be more effective. تمام. حاجة تانية برضو كل ما margin propensity to consume is high ده معناها إن value of multiplier would be high and the fiscal policy would be more effective. الحاجات اللي هناخدها بعد كده في المحاضرات الجاية إن شاء الله هي هنشوف effectiveness of fiscal policy on the economic activities. بس بقى هنشوف slope of IS curve والslope of LM curve under 3 shapes. عندنا اللي هي classical range intermediate range of LM Keynesian range of LM. بعد كده هناخد إن شاء الله the effectiveness of monetary policy on the economic activity.